Okay, welcome to the Cops and Convicts podcast with Sean Shepard. I'm Sean Shepard, your host, and today we have Ernesto Sanchez. Ernesto and I just met last week.
Yes.
Before we get started, I want to invite everybody to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, helps the channel grow. Ernesto, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. I appreciate the invite.
Hey man, once we connected last week, I knew I had to have you on. So Ernesto, tell me where you're from originally.
So I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, the area of West Los Angeles, specifically um, on Normandy and Slauson. So that's where I grew up, where most of my family was for many years. Of course, they're all migrant individuals that came to the U.S., to
From where? From,
California, from
from
Mexico.
what part?
My grandfather and my grandmother were from Michoacan,
Mm.
and my mother was born in Colima. So it was I mean, just like any other migrant family looking for a better living. They came down here in the 70s, and in search for a better living. And of course, that's where I came out of. My mother was the only woman out of uh 10 children. So um
So she has 9 brothers.
9 brothers. Imagine how that went for her. So she was kind of like a mom to them rather than a sister. And yeah, I was born and raised there. My mother was married, of course, to my father, biological father. But he kind of went out the picture early on in my childhood when I was about 4 years old.
Join the club, bro.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it kind of just took off from there. My mother, she did the best that she could, but she was also suffering from her own trauma. So Um, I think it was very difficult from what I've learned now about her and getting to know her was that she was also going through the heartbreak and the uncertainty of what was going to happen to us as a family, me and my sister, because I had an older sister. So by her working and then her having to deal with a lot of the trauma that she experienced, um, I'm not assuming, but more of in the sense of my father being abusive, right? And just kind of fell into that cycle. So, early on that really affected me. Um, but yeah, I mean, it really had a factor in how I was brought up, right? Like back in the days, you were able to get a good ass whooping.
Right.
So I was a product of a lot of that.
The
Um,
product of a lot of ass whoopings.
Yeah, a product of a lot of ass whooping.
Join the club, bro.
But I just that kind of just molded who I was.
Mm.
I believe, like my mother was very abusive. I've spoke about it in many times, and it was just kind of like I believe like now as I know the terminology and I know in the sense of how we're developed through trauma, it was just like she was hurt, so hurt people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she didn't really have the coping skills or the therapy or the circle to find healing and understanding about what was going on in her life. So of course that's kind of like transmitted into your kids,
Yeah.
right? And unfortunately it was transmitted into me. So like like people say, oh well, man, we all have rough upbringings. Well, a lot of us, it affects us in different manners. And for me, it affected me early on in my childhood. Like I mentioned, father walked out when I was about 4 years old. So after that, like you could just imagine like having a battle with the absence of not having your father, and in the absence of getting an ass whooping because of, let's say I did something wrong. Well, my mom didn't have the right parenting skills, right? She didn't have all these new things that we do with our children in the sense of helping them grow, right? So, yeah, that's what pretty much took place. School wasn't a priority. Um, Education was definitely not something that was implemented in my household.
For you and your sister.
Um, I think more in the sense that my mom wasn't educated. So for her, it was not like oh, you got to go on, and like she didn't plan for us to go to like like college and
Right.
pick a career.
Right.
It was just like go to school, finish school, and that's that. I think that after school, like work came, right? Um, so like that's how it kind of took place.
Yeah. So when you mention your sister, is your you and your sister. Hang on, let me just take this down. Not gonna work today. We tried. As soon as
Sorry, we don't have something better to.
but as soon as the interview started, um, I knew it was going to bail on us. But um, so you grew up in South Central, single parent home. You and your sister, school wasn't a priority. You mentioned your sister in the past tense.
Yeah. Well, she's still around.
Okay.
She lives in Florida. She found the love of her life, and she moved down there to Florida. She has a beautiful young little girl, and her husband, and actually he's a correction officer. So
Oh, really?
yeah, kind of um great guy. He's definitely a great guy. Like I joke around about it, and I say like, man, if I had more sisters, I would want a guy like that to date my sisters.
Mm.
That's how good of a dude he is, right? And I'm happy for her. And I think that she also, it being with everything that perhaps she experienced in her life, she's just like, you know what, let's get out of here and let's go search for a better living. And of course, I mean, Florida's no different financially, but still, like, she has her own family, and I'm proud of her. I'm proud of her actually grabbing her life by the horns and just saying, you know what, let me go ahead and rebuild something for myself. And that's how, at least how I've perceived it.
Were you too close when you were growing up?
Yeah, we're definitely close. I took more of the ass whoopings for her.
Mm.
Um, we were close because she became like my mother. She became someone that I can confide in. She became someone that, as silly as it may sound, someone that I can ask, like, how does this shirt look? Like, or hey, I'm hungry. I need, and our relationship became, yeah, we were close as two siblings, but it also, I felt like she was like my mother. So I know that when I got incarcerated, um, it affected her a lot in a major way,
Hmm.
and of course my mother remarried and I have two younger brothers. Um, but like really, like it took a strain into our relationship, and the distance of me being sentenced to life in prison and being sent away, like it was really rough.
So talk to me about you're in grade school. You said school wasn't that important to you. Where do you feel like your life changed? You just mentioned being sentenced to life in prison. Where along the lines in your life, in your young life, do you feel like things started to fall into place to bring you down that road?
um I mean, I understand now, and I've actually never even talked about this on a platform like this. I've just more of it shared with, like, because it's like my own journey, and I've shared about it with people that I trust. But like, definitely my father not being there affected me, right? Like having that father figure, that male role model, right? And of course, like I had family members. I had my grandfather that was like a father figure to me. I had uncles in the pictures. Like
Yeah.
I had cousins. So it's not like, oh, I'm like this individual that has no attention, right? But there is also components within my family that perhaps contribute into my upbringings, good and bad, right? I mean, you're speaking of growing up in the 80s, or being raised around gentlemen, nine brothers that are born in the 70s and 80s and 90s in South Central Los Angeles. So you could just imagine the dynamics of that. I've learned good things and I learned bad things, right? Some of the bad things I wouldn't want to get into them, but like I feel like they shaped me for who I am today, right? And I in a sense I value that, you know. But being so young and experiencing the absence of my father, and then one of the things that I never shared was like I was molested. So from a certain age to a certain age, there was an episodes of that,
Yeah.
right? So by the time I was 10 years old, I had already fully been um exposed to something that I should have never been exposed to.
Yeah.
And I was aroused, right? Like I was tainted, like I was taken advantage. So psychologically, when you're that young, you really don't know any better.
Well, let me say this to you, bro. I had no idea that you and I were going to have so much in common
Yeah.
because the things that happened to you before the age of 10, including being molested, happened to me. You know, my god sister and a male cousin. I thank God every day that it didn't go all the way for me, but what I did experience was bad enough that it affected me, right?
Yeah.
And I want to give you props for being open about that because a lot of our viewers have experienced the same thing. And when I went public with my experience several years ago, you know, the Huffington Post did a story, a two-part story on the work I do in the community and being a survivor of sexual abuse. You give a lot of people courage to look in the mirror and say, look, this happened to me, and it's therapeutic for them to get that off their chest. They've been hiding it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I appreciate you sharing that with me, and all before the age of 10, just like you.
Yeah. So that was kind of difficult because like I've almost have to have like aid my own self,
Right.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But I got to like a certain age when I was like about 12, 13 years old that along with the mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that I had experienced, I had kind of told myself like I'm not gonna be nobody's victim anymore.
Right.
So I chose to be the aggressor,
In what form?
um, in lashing out, in being disrespectful, in being the first one to bite, in being the first one to fight, in being the first one to sound louder, scream louder, and be tougher,
As a
you know,
defense
as a defense
mechanism.
mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Because I knew that if I allow someone to become close, well, then that was a potential for me to be hurt, you know? So I think that a mixture of all of that, of course, like it only leads you towards a path of meeting hurt people.
Yeah.
So growing up in the community that I grew up in was a gang infested community. It was a drug infested community, you know, so drugs were definitely a factor. Um Growing up in a community where gangs were like it was a presence. It was a presence, you know, in South Central they say man every block is a hood, right? And in some way or form whether you make a decision, um some other people make a decision for you. In my case, I made the decision. I made the decision to wanting to be part of the local gang, and I envisioned that. And I w- was I was caught and interested by the way of life, you know, the money, the power, the respect, and all these things that are talked about in movies and music and you see in everyday life. And like I started to pursue that life. You know, like no one wakes up and becomes a gangster. Like no one wakes up and commits a crime. People are kind of groomed and brought into this simply by the environment or by the choices that people put in front of you, you know. And it being that I was hurt, like really didn't have any type of maturity to say like, oh, I want to go off to college and become this and become that, because I was still caught up in this episode of my life where I'm trying to um understand my identity as a young man, right? Because I didn't have that father figure to sit there and say, "Hey, man, you know what? You're supposed to go through these stages of your life, or you're supposed to act this way, or you're supposed
Mm.
to be this way." And it was kind of left to me to paint the picture. So, I mean, I didn't finish school. Um,
You didn't finish high school.
I didn't finish high school. I didn't finish high school. I didn't. I had a very poor academic.
Didn't care.
Didn't care. Um, I always had an interest in sports. I like sports. I like basketball. I like football. But that didn't even do it for me, And sadly, like by 17, 18 years old, I had already set my mind in what I wanted to do.
And what was that?
And that was just to like become a gang member. I think like every young kid growing up in the hood and listening to all these, rappers and listening to all these war stories and generational drug lords and whatnot, you think like, man, I'm gonna sell drugs, I'm gonna get out the hood, I'm gonna have this, I'm gonna have that. And I bit into the dream. I bit into the dream and I bit into the rhetoric of behaving and acting a certain way. And like sooner rather than later, that became my beliefs and it became the force and the energy and how I moved forward in life. And like it all takes me to like when I committed my crime, like on that day when I committed my crime, I was already fully blown and invested into this. So there was no going back.
Before you get there, let me ask you this. A couple moments back, I saw you get emotional.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind? What was causing that?
Um I get emotional because like you imagine that was when I was 8 and my father not being there like um I'm 35 years old now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I'm a father now, right? Um, but I've definitely haven't let any of that go. So, of course, I went off to prison and I did the so-called work on myself, right? To be able to recognize that I have forethought and consequential thinking and that I have coping skills and relapse preventions and all these things that the board and, the governor's asking of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I haven't repaired from that. Like I haven't moved forward from that because I've come out into society and I'm faced with the reality. I'm faced with the reality of what's what I'm present in, which is me being released and having to fit into this society after serving so much time, um, into expectations, right? That people perhaps have on me. And I'm still carrying those demons. I'm still carrying those things from the past. So it's like, of course, when I talk about them, they're not an easy subject to
Mm-hmm.
to cover on, right? Because there's still sensitive things there, right? And people say, well, man, perhaps you haven't healed. Um, for me, the way I see it, it's like I'm in a better situation than I was years ago,
Right.
right? Like perhaps in the past, if I would have talked about the situation, which I never talked about the situation that happened to me, um, I wouldn't know how to regulate my emotions. You know, now that I'm older, I'm able to talk about it, but I know how to regulate my emotions. And I think that certain things you're never really gonna fully repair from. You know,
It's like a scar,
it's a scar.
right? I get it. I get it. Um, I understand where you're coming from when you talk about we're on your timeline. You talked about being 12 and 13 and starting to to gravitate toward other hurt people.
Yeah.
Once you established a couple of friends, a group of friends that you decided you were going to click up with and hang out with, between the ages of 12 and 17, 18 years old,
Yeah.
what was your lifestyle like? What did you all do on a daily?
I mean, just to like touch a little bit on it. I mean, you're a 12, 13-year-old kid. I mean, you really don't have, at least for me, I can say that I didn't have no goal plans, right? Like I'm just a kid in the hood, right? Whether I'm in school, I mean, I'm going to school. Like I remember at a very young age already this because this will put me in junior high.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was already selling drugs in school. You know, I was already selling drugs in school. I already had a connect. I was able to go buy drugs, which was weed at the time, bag it up, and take it to school and sell it to the other kids.
7th and 8th grade.
Yeah. So,
So you so you weren't just selling it. I'm assuming you were using it too.
of course,
So your clientele were your classmates.
of course.
Okay.
So, doing that, but in the sense too, you're a youth, you're a child still. So whether it was playing basketball at the local park or playing basketball with my neighbors or being part of a recreational park, basketball team, like that was just as simple as it was. It didn't really require much. You don't do much as a youth, right? You
Right.
just either insert yourself in some type of sport or I mean in school academics. And for me, it was okay, I'm selling drugs, but I'm also trying to do good. And what good meant was at least to be involved with my family,
Mm-hmm.
right? And being able to be in some type of sport, right?
What was your favorite sport?
Um, you know what? Above all, I think basketball
Okay.
has definitely been something that I love. I love the art of it. It
Kobe.
wasn't always like, of course, of course. It wasn't always like that. I played more football than anything,
Mm.
but a lot of my guy cousins they played basketball, and that allowed me to even fall in love with it even more. Um, by just being around them and then seeing them play, and then of course, like I think that when you go into playing some type of sport like football, it kind of gives you the confidence to really do anything else because of the physical
I agree.
that it takes, right?
Yeah.
So when you play basketball and going into the rim, you really don't have too much of a sensitive.
Nah, you trying to lay somebody out on
Yeah.
your way to the basket. Yeah,
so
I understand.
so it allowed me to just be more physical. And
Let me ask you this. When I look back on my childhood, and we've had a similar childhood in terms of parent stuff, trauma, anger, hurt. I feel like football saved my life
yeah.
because I was gonna hurt somebody if it wasn't for football, where I was able to get all of that out. Do you feel like that helped you?
I feel like it did, but I had such a low morale
Mm.
and a low self-esteem that I remember I think I made it to like, I was like in the ninth grade.
So you're a freshman.
Yeah, I was a freshman. And I signed up for the football team. I made it. Um, I remember I was playing left tackle and I would substitute for also left linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day we went to go play. I'm not sure what school it was, whether it was Jordan or Dorsey High School, because at the time I went to Manual, which is right there on Keenan, Vermont, in South Central. And I remember feeling a certain way, like feeling like not accepted, and not by the team because we all got along, but I remember this because I feel like that has been the things that have affected me in my life, but it was not the support. So I was there, but I didn't have my family there.
Mm.
So it's almost as if like I always took it to personal, and I always took it personal um when I would be in these situations and I wouldn't have that support of my mother and my father there. So I remember playing at that game and looking at the bleachers and then not having that
Mm.
parent there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I remember one time, like it was my stepfather. He's like, "Man, I bought you cleats. I bought you like all these things, and like why didn't you pursue it?" And I'm just like, every hear my mind's like, "Man, well, no one showed up to the game, right?"
But you didn't tell him that.
But I didn't tell him that, right? Because like you don't want to seem ungrateful for somebody buying you something, right? And I remember after that game, I was just like, "I'm cool."
That's what you needed, though.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? You needed some support,
yeah,
and I can appreciate that, man. I really can. So, regardless of how you felt about the sport, because you didn't have the support of your family, you didn't want to play.
no,
So you did sports, and now you're still in school, selling weed. Freshman year, you were selling weed and playing sports.
yeah.
By your sophomore year, you weren't playing sports
Well,
anymore.
I didn't even finish the ninth grade.
So you stopped going to school.
I stopped going to school.
Okay, so you're not in school anymore. You didn't finish the ninth grade. So basically, you have an eighth grade education at this point,
Yeah.
right? What did you do with all that free time every day when you woke
I
up each
mean,
day?
I basically just stayed home, or I went to go kick it with other individuals that were in the same circumstances, you know? And I mean, I had distant cousins that were already gang members.
Did your mom think you were in school?
Nah, I mean, she knew that I didn't want to go to school. So I wasn't even going to school, and she didn't even see it as like
She didn't. She didn't
she
trip.
didn't care. It's
And what
like
about
and if she did, like she mentioned it and it was like whatever.
what
You
about
know,
your sister?
it really didn't have like a factor in it. It was almost as if like the whole situation of me not going to school and all that, like yeah, I remember people talking, oh, he doesn't want to go to school no more, this, and that, what he's gonna do with his life, and so on and so on. But like it didn't really matter to me. And I don't think that it had a very high importance in somebody else's um eyes either, and that including probably perhaps my sister and my mother, right? Like, I mean, I think that she hoped that I went to school and got an education, but what are you gonna do to this kid that's, you know, already kind of growing up and
Were you
doesn't
big? Were you a big
I
kid?
was a big kid. So I was a big kid.
So you're not going to school, but you had an income, right?
A simple one,
But it was an income.
Yeah.
So if you were hustling, and if you wanted to buy something, you could buy something for yourself.
Yeah.
So outside of living under your mother's roof, you were self-sufficient in hanging out with your homies, hustling out in the street, making your money.
Yeah.
Did you ever reach a point where you said, I need to make more money?
No. I don't feel like I feel like even though I was doing that, I didn't have this humongous game plan.
Mm.
Like, and I didn't have to sell drugs. Like my mom put food on the table. I had a stepfather, right? Like I had family. I had uncles. I had grandmother and grandfather. Like people were there.
So why'd you do it?
I think it was more in the sense of like trying to follow the footsteps of the people around me,
Mm.
you know, trying to fit in.
They were your support.
Yeah.
That while you were performing, they were there in the way that your parents weren't there when you tried to play football.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean,
That's what it sounds like to me.
it was.
Like you got that support, you got that positive reinforcement from doing that, from your guys out in the street.
Yeah. And I had started to hang around with certain people and certain folks, and you could just imagine, like you mentioned, like these people are showing the support, they're showing the love, but they're also showing the destructive behavior, right? They're also showing um, characteristics of being impulsive and angry and resentful, right? And then that contributes into a lot of the gang banging because when you're growing up in an environment where, like where I grew up, it was just mostly 50% blacks and 50% Mexicans, right? The only really time you seen a cop was like, or a white man was if you seen a police officer,
Right.
and most of the stores were Asian owned, right?
Interesting.
Interesting, right?
Right.
Like, so you just see within two different races just killing each other, right? And like generations and generations contributing to that.
So your homies that you hung out with in the gang that you were in was 100% Mexican, or was it a mixture?
It was at least 100% Mexican, a good 99.9 of it. So, what I always thought, well, now that I look at it, because I'm older, but when you're growing up, you're all mixed up, right? You go to school, your best friend is black,
Right.
or if you're black, your best friend is Mexican.
Yep.
You play sports together, you're happy kids, right? And then you get to that certain age or that certain grade, whether it's in junior high or high school, and just depending of who your family is or what side of the tracks you grew up in, then that's what you become, right? So it's like if you grew up, some of my best friends that were black that I was growing up with, we grew up in school. And now since I'm grown up and I'm part of this gang and they joined this gang, well, we're enemies now. So it doesn't make no sense. Like, right? And then
I can't imagine that.
you
I can't imagine being tight with Hector,
yeah.
right? And Hector's tight with Tyrone, like tight.
Yeah.
And you guys make a decision to get into these gangs, and I don't have no problem with you.
Yeah.
My problem with you is based on who you hanging out with.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that? Like, how do you your subconscious, do you process that?
You don't process it when you're that young. You don't have no forethought. Why? Because you're not fully mature. You're
Right.
not fully mature. You're this kid and you're gullible and you're impressionable. Like all these things, you're not developed. You're not mature. So you believe the rhetoric. You believe in what is said. You believe in what is passed down by your family or by your environment. And you buy into it. And the sad part about it is that, like, these are continuous stories. Like, I'm not the last youngster in the hood that's gonna buy into a fucking story.
Right.
I'm not the last one.
And the story is about those people.
Exactly.
Got you.
Like, because there's gonna be many more kids like me coming, whether they're brown or black. They're gonna be coming out of these environments with the same narrative, right? The same rhetoric behind it, right? Whether I'm trying to become a drug lord, a gang member, whatever it may be. And it's all from a broken system, right? Of a father not being there, perhaps growing up in an environment where it really dictates how you're groomed and how you perceive throughout life, right? The rhetoric that you receive, perhaps from even your father or the older men in your household, whether it's your family, your cousins, your friends. So that has an impact in how we are brought up and how we develop, right? How we even perceive women,
Right.
how we perceive each other, how we perceive other races, right? And I mean, I've seen it numerous times. I work with youth, and I've seen it like how this is just a continuous thing. And I mean, now I see I see everything that went wrong.
It's interesting because I told you football saved me from getting myself in trouble and inflicting harm on other people. You've given me a different perspective based on your experience. Staying in football could have maintained and grew relationships for you,
Mhm.
or people outside of your race, or
Yeah.
even people inside of your same race that went to a different gang.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Um, I've always understood the impact that sports has in a positive way on our society.
Oh
It
yeah.
brings us together, but I never thought about it the way you explained it. The way high school sports is,
Yeah.
like, if you don't go to school, you can't practice,
Hmm.
right? So if you didn't go to school, basically you can't be on the football team.
Yeah.
You could have joined an intramural basketball team, but there's like there isn't really intramural football,
Yeah.
right? It's Pop Warner, but once you get to high school, it's high school.
Yeah.
So I look back at your life and say, like, what if somebody came to one of your games,
Yeah.
and you found the right position to play? That's another big thing in football, because you could be floundering playing football because they have you in the wrong position.
Yeah.
So you've made these decisions to get in these social circles. You dropped out of ninth grade and you talked about your crime. What led up to this crime that you haven't discussed yet, but what led up to this moment that changed your life?
Um. Well, I mean, I always remember like it was yesterday, right? Like it was December 14, 2007. It was a Friday night, and my day had started like that's one thing. Like I can always remember that I've always had like a sense of being responsible, right? Like being accountable, holding myself accountable. Like I've always been like the worst liar and like and the worst person to perhaps even tell a secret to, right?
Because you can't keep it.
Well, because like I feel like the morale that's been given to me by my grandparents and the people that love me and my uncles and my aunts, like it's like be honest, right? Be honest and hold yourself accountable and responsible, right? And what I mean by like also in a sense of like me, how can I say this? Like I've always been responsible of what I need to do, right? I've been shown good work ethics. And if I have something to do, a chore, I do it and I keep myself accountable of it and I'm responsible of it and I get it done. The reason why I say this is because that day, like I had already like finished my chores or what I needed to do to help my mother, right? My stepfather was already in the picture. I had a little brother at the time. I had two little brothers. And that day I knew we had a gang meeting. So it's like I did my chores, right? Did what I had to do. And then like I told my mom I'm out. I gotta go to the hood. And I lived in the hood, right? Like I only lived a block away from where the meeting was gonna take place. And you know, you imagine it's a Friday night, um, in South Central Los Angeles, and you know, the tension is there between us and black rival gangs. And not just black rival gangs, but also rival Mexican gangs.
Right.
Because we go at it with everybody. And, you know, we're there to have a gang meeting, a small one, and we're there to also have, which is my co-defendant, commit a crime. So it's like kind of his you know acceptance into to the clique and you know that day, this whole crime was like kind of directed towards him, so that
For him to commit it.
for him to commit it,
Okay.
and for him to gain his bones, I guess you can say, right?
Okay.
Um, I mentioned tension. I mentioned there was a lot of rivalry, right? And I mean, we did what, I mean, I guess I would consider like every other gang member does. You know, you're plotting a homicide, or you're plotting a drive-by shooting, and to go shoot another race, or the same race, right? Whoever gets in the way, like, you want to be recognized. Like, those are the emotions that you're going through. And in that night, I remember this young gentleman, that was my co-defendant. Like, he showed up, and they were pressing him of how he was supposed to go commit this crime, right? And like, my name came up in the mix of saying, you're gonna go with him. And me being the pressure case that I am, right, at that time, um, and also wanting to be acknowledged, I said, let's go. Let's go and commit this crime.
Is this your first time you were going to do something like this?
No, there was numerous times that I had did stuff, right? But this was gonna be solely just with me and him. This individual, I've never really met him, so we didn't have no history like I did with my other boys,
Right.
right? This was a young dude. He was no older than like 15, 16 years old, right? So, um, we ended up requesting a G ride. Um, there was this paisano that was able to get us a G ride, which is a stolen vehicle. We paid him in drugs. I still remember it was an old Toyota Camry, and the kind that you turn on with a screwdriver, or a flathead, I mean.
Right.
And we proceeded to go, and we got the car, and we went from the west side of LA to the east side of LA, which is South Central, the east side of South Central. And in that event, like, we're looking for rival gang members,
Anybody.
anybody, specifically, you know, um, a certain area, you know, and we didn't find anybody, right? And what I did, because I was already like ingrained in what I wanted to do and what I needed to do, I took control of the situation in a negative manner. And I told this youngster, you're going to drive. You're not going to go commit the crime. Like, I'm going to commit the crime. You're going to drive. Right?
Did he argue with you?
Nah, he didn't argue. I mean, he's 15 years old. He's probably he's probably scared shit of his life, just like I am. I'm not no fucking hardcore individual. Like, I just know that I'm impulsive, and I have all this energy and all this negativity.
I just asked you that because you had told me that the original mission was for him to do it.
Yeah. And it was, but like, seeing the fear in him, like, goes back to like the responsibility, right? Like, me being in there, and like, you know what? Like, I felt that empathy for him. Like, just relax, bro. Just drive, you know?
And he's 15.
And he's like 15, 16 years old.
Okay.
And,
There's no guarantee he's even a good driver at this point.
exactly. But he said he could drive.
Okay.
Right? So I'm like, you're driving, I'm busting. And we definitely couldn't find anybody that night. And we're on this stolen vehicle on the east side of South Central Los Angeles with very low gas. Right? So it's like, you know what? Let's turn around. Let's go back to the hood. Let's go back to where we were at. Right? It's a failed mission. And through that event, we're like at an intersection waiting to turn left. And a patrol car passes us. And it's LAPD. And as soon as they pass us, like, side by side, coming in the opposite direction, the officer puts his full bright light all on us. And come on, you see two young bald Mexicans in this car.
Did you all make eye contact with?
Of course, we did. You know, like
hey, you know what I do, right?
Yeah.
And you know what cops call that? Cops call that the I want to have a conversation with you look.
Yeah.
And so you guys made the mistake of making eye contact with them.
So we whether we made eye contact or not at that point, like you imagine that's happened years ago, and you know they so called it, they busted a bitch. You know, they turned around, got behind us. My crime, you could tell he had fear. I had fear, right? I was like, I'm not going to prison.
But
Right?
what made you think you were going to prison? You hadn't done anything.
Well, I mean, previous crimes or just the paranoia. And I mean, you hear all these things like whether I was gonna go to prison or not for something that I done in the past.
Did you get caught for something in the past?
No. So you get what I'm saying? Like, and then you have this strap, you have this gun that God knows what has been done with it.
Well,
you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of contributing factors into this. And then when you're thinking like, not too many brown black brothers make it in the hood when you're like, you know, being pulled over by cops.
Were you high at the time?
I was high as a kite.
Okay, I had to ask the question.
Yeah, I was high as a kite. I was high as a kite.
You got all the ingredients for what you're about to tell me.
Yeah, exactly. So like these officers, they didn't pull us over just yet. Like I knew what they were doing. They were running the license plate. Bam, the car comes out stolen. So they start pulling us over in this certain location as we're going back home. And I told my crime partner, like, don't pull over. You know? And I'm starting to think, like, what do I do? How do I get away? Right? And quickly in my immature mind, I was like, well, we're going to go to the park where we grew up. They're fixing the park. I'm going to go ahead and toss the gun and we run. Right? Of course, a plan never goes according to plan. And, you know, in that event, like, I remember we got to a certain location in a certain street, which is actually on Normandy, where I grew up. And I came out the window and I started to fire my gun at them.
So wait, you went from we're trying to go to this park so I can ditch the guns.
Yes.
We can jump out and run.
Yes.
To I'm gonna start shooting.
I'm gonna start shooting. And I just think like it goes back to like, and I'm not making excuses, but it's just like the development of how like I was not only homicidal, but I was suicidal.
Homicidal, suicidal, and high off your ass.
Exactly. So you put all those recipes, like I didn't have no worth. I feel like I didn't have no worth. I was ready to gunslinging with just any ordinary gang member. Why not with an officer? You know? And I didn't really like have any self-worth. My low self-esteem, my morale was very low. And I knew it was because you just feel it. You feel cold. Your approach with people. You know, the way you think. Right? Like the way that I was able to process things. Like being cold and being heartless. And not having any like consequential thinking to sit there like, man, what if I do this? Well, don't do that, right? Like you don't have a voice of reason when you're filled up with so much hurt.
And drugs.
And drugs on top of that, because that impairs your judgment.
Yeah.
So it's like at these officers put their lights and try to pull us over. I said, nah, man, I'm cool. Fuck you, right? And I start firing. As I start firing, we're making we're going down the street, and I tell my crime partner, man, make a left and then make a right, and when you stop, we're gonna run. And because I have felt that these cops were gonna stay a little bit more back, it being now that I shot at them.
Right.
But by that point, I have like 2 helicopters on me.
That quick.
You have a gang of other officers, and you can hear them around trying to, whether it's block off streets or whatnot, right? Because we're already in a pursuit.
Right.
And, you know, we got to the park. We made it to the park, but there was no room to run. And as soon as I opened the door, they unleashed fire on me and I was shot. So um I lay there on the floor shot with the gun a few feet away from me.
Like a hail of bullets.
Yeah.
They like whatever police officers were there. They were all shooting at you.
They stated that when I came out of the car that I aimed the gun at them, right? Um I mean, I could have, I don't know, to be quite honest with you, but all my entry wounds were from the back. So it's like, unless I was, you know,
Right, running and
running
got
and,
you.
and yeah, I don't blame them. They were doing the job, you know. And at that point, like I really didn't value their lives, or nor did I value my life, nor the life of my crime partner or the community. You know, this was a park that I grew up in. This is at night. This is, you know, about almost midnight when this crime happened. So it's like, for me, it was a full circle of being laying there in the ground at this park where where I played flag football, where I played basketball, where I played soccer, right? Where I went to go and enjoy myself as a child, because it's only 3 blocks away from where I grew up. So it's like, to be sitting there, laying there, bleeding, and like not knowing what life was gonna like hold for me, because I didn't know what was gonna come out of that, in the sense that if I was gonna survive, if I was gonna make it. Um, and I mean, of course, like I shot at 77th Division, which is a very well-known division in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s and 70s. I mean, they were ruthless, and I got my share of ass whoopings,
From them.
from them before I was even booked. Before I was processed, before the ambulance came, right?
So when you said I got my share of ass whoopings, I thought that you were referring to things that had happened before this night.
Oh no,
So you're saying how many times did they shoot you? How many
5,
times were you hit?
5.
So you were shot 5 times.
Yeah.
And before the ambulance got there, they beat you up.
Oh, of course. As I'm bleeding, you know.
Let me ask you this. I know people who've been shot, but I've never asked this question. Where were you shot? What parts of your body were you shot?
2 in the lower leg, the side, and the back, and then half my finger is missing.
Let me see. What did it feel like to get shot? What does it feel like to have this hot metal going inside your body?
Well, to be quite honest, I was coked the fuck out. So have you ever seen the movie Scarface?
Oh, come on, bro. give me some of that. You didn't feel it.
You don't really feel it, because the adrenaline is running, right? You're coked the fuck out. You don't feel it. Like I felt like fucking I felt like Denzel Washington, when he's fucking running his fucking mouth in the jungles of how he's shot, and like I was still talking. And talking shit to these officers
After being shot.
and after being shot, and I banged on them, like I'm banging on them as I'm laying there on the floor. Like I'm turned up at that level, and you don't feel it. Like you don't. And I remember, like, I grew up, in a very like religious, spiritual family, Catholics, and did my whole confirmation, accepted the Catholic Church and all that. It's just like, I remember at the time, like, it's actually this Virgin Mary that I have, that my
Because-
mom kept, and I was wearing it the day of my crime. And I remember I grabbed it, and I was just like, man, please forgive me for my sins. Like, please allow me to like be at peace, and I just closed my eyes and I allowed whatever was gonna take place,
That's deep.
like after that took place.
So I thought you were gonna say, forgive me for my sins, please let me live. You said just let me be at peace, because now I'm going back to you saying you were suicidal.
Yeah.
So you were good with however it turned out.
Yeah.
Really?
And the sad part about it is like that's kind of been like my like the way that I live
To at
to
that point, or to today,
to this day.
to
Like
today.
I just really want to be at peace, right? Because like after everything that I've gone through and after coming home and everything, like I just want to be at peace.
Bro, before the camera started rolling, we talked about our personal situations.
Yeah,
You having a rough day, I'm not having the best day,
yeah,
and we don't have to get into it. But the most important thing to me in my life is peace.
yeah,
And I make my decisions based on if this is going to bring me more peace or less peace. And for me to hear you say that the most important thing for you at that moment after being shot 5 times, you're praying to the Virgin Mary
hmm
of just let me be at peace is heavy for me. It's heavy for me to hear you say.
yeah,
And to hear you say that you're searching for that peace to this day.
yeah,
Well, I pray that you find it, you know. So you've been shot 5 times, you don't really feel it, you're still lashing out at the cops, they beat you up, they arrest you, they take you directly to the hospital.
yeah,
I'm just in awe of the fact that you were shot 5 times. You said all of your entry wounds were in the back. You did not get hit in the spine.
yeah.
You didn't get hit in the neck.
You know, I'm thankful. Like I did a lot of research, like on my crime, and then I did a lot of research, like on the officers. Of course, like when you're going through trial, when you're going through these processes, and like they give you all the officers' names. And I remember when I was getting ready for board, which was not so long ago, to come home, right? Like I told my wife, like, man, go search for this, and that. And she came across an article that was, it was under the LAPD, and there was like a blog of people like just giving these comments, these harsh comments, right?
On this cop?
On me,
Oh,
right? Because like I know the officers' names,
right.
right? Like they were written in my case. And they're telling this person that did the shooting or that shot me, like you should have gone for the head. Like you should have just eliminated that motherfucker, right?
Well, they were trying.
What they were trying, but
Right.
like this was a woman that shot me, and she said I wasn't trained. She's like I was trained to de-escalate a situation.
And that shoots you at your center mass.
Yeah. So like just to know like the professionalism that this woman had and her partner, because it was a guy also as well, had to be able to de-escalate a situation. Like I was blessed. Like I don't have like now I don't have nothing against officers because I've learned the value of humans,
Right.
like the value of people's occupations, right? And I don't have this ideology that is me against them, right? Like I've removed that from my core beliefs because I've gotten to know people for who they are,
Right.
right? So there's a great amount of remorse for the crime that I committed, for the damage that I've done to my community, to my victims, and then to also understand what it took for this woman to shoot at a young kid. I imagine like I looked young as hell at that age.
So wait. You said it was a female officer that shot you. You got hit 5 times. Not all 5 of those bullets came from her.
I mean, I'm assuming that they did.
Really?
I'm
To this day, you don't even know.
I don't really know. I'm assuming that they did. Um, what kind of like what made me really empathize with her is when I came across this statement in my paperwork, and um, she's like, I had to make a choice, you know, and it's almost as if like I seen this young kid come out of a car pointing a gun at me. I had to make a difficult choice, and that was to protect the life of me and my partner, you know? So it's like, damn, like I put this woman through this,
Mm.
mental and emotional, and perhaps even spiritual war, because like, you sign up as an officer to protect and serve your community. And here you have this fucking young hoodlum kid, um, that's pretty much disrupting society and has a cold recipe of homicide and suicidal tendencies. And, so it really like, that really did take a toll on me also as well.
Is this the only officer that you know of that has statements about that evening?
No, um, I mean, there was 5 officers involved. Um, she was just more of the primary officer. And then you got to keep in mind, like, out of this whole case, I've read like up to like 60 victims, right? Because, you're bringing in sergeants, lieutenants, and captains, and investigators, and so on and so on, paramedics, and all that. So, what they see there, it's shared through documentation of how they seen this crime and how they perceived what happened.
How
And
old were you?
I was 18 years old.
Oh. So you were 18, and just for the sake of argument, in in that hectic situation, it's very unlikely that that woman was accurate enough to hit you by herself 5 times. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah.
Because there were other officers shooting at you, right? So I I think you're an extraordinary human being to have gone through something that traumatic and
Yeah.
still be able to process that night through the eyes of the officers that shot you,
Yeah.
and how you have compassion for their position and their profession. And listen, I hope a lot of members of law enforcement watch this. I've seen people in your position, people who are former gang members, have a moment of clarity and realize the damage that you all have done to your own communities and speak out on that. I don't hear officers providing the same mea culpa,
Yeah.
right? I hear gang members say, I've done the work, I've done the introspection, I realize what I've done. So I want to give you props. I just want to take a moment to inform our viewers. I'm interviewing Ernesto Sanchez. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, and ring that notification bell for this interview. So you're in the hospital. You're 18 years old. You've been shot. How long does it take you to recover from your injuries before you go? Now you're going into the judicial system.
Not even a week later, I was booked at LA County Jail, even with stitchings. And I remember this happened on a Friday. By the following Wednesday, I was already in the county jail. They said you have 3 days to start learning how to walk or move. You have to move.
So the county does move quickly when they want to.
Yeah. And
That's
then
wild.
like I'm in this hospital protected by officers, right? And
Were you handcuffed?
I was handcuffed. You have detectives coming to see me. I'm just like taking morphine after morphine shot, and they're like, you have to learn how to move quick. The nurses are telling me because you're gonna be transferred into, LA County Jail. I'm taken into LA County Jail, bandaged all up, in a wheelchair, get dropped off, and then now I'm faced with the reality of being housed with hundreds and not thousands of men, right? And as a young man, like, of course, like, this is what I strive for. So why am I gonna sit here and cry about anything, right? Ali, I felt like I was at home though. Like I felt like I was at a perfect place. And like very quickly on in my incarceration, like I started to really fit in.
You knew people that were already in there?
I did knew people, but you don't need to know people in prison. And what I mean by that is that, through pain, people are able to relate, you know? So I feel like the pain that I had, right, it's always transmitted into other people
And vice versa.
and vice versa. So you come to like grow bonds with individuals that are perhaps going through similar situations. And that tends to like unite people.
Did you tell people what you were in there for?
Oh yeah, of course.
So the interesting thing is I'm putting myself into your shoes. Now, if you had been incarcerated for shooting at some other gang members, maybe you wouldn't have been as communicative about
Yeah.
why you were in there.
Yeah.
You shooting at the cops.
Yeah,
You were a celebrity.
Yeah, you get put like on the high bracket.
Yeah.
You get put on the high bracket like, oh, this motherfucker's crazy.
Right.
Right? Like very low percentage of people do it, right? So of course, like I went in a high bracket already with this character of saying, hey, like I'm this person, you know? And then I've always been good with my words to some extent. Like I don't have a high education.
That's why you're here.
Yeah.
The
like,
conversation we had last Thursday, like it just clicked.
But like it's not that I've been good with my words because I did not learn how to read and write and really like educate myself to some extent until I was in prison. But I've always had this like contagious and just the easy way of communicating with people.
I wish more people had your gift, man. That's what's missing in our society right now. People don't know how to communicate very well.
Like I feel communication, like, and I talked about this with my wife, like it's key, man. Like the way we express ourselves, we talk, and it's hard to have just a simple conversation with someone besides like not besides but like to have a conversation and try to insert like your political views, your religious background, and all of this and that, and just accept somebody for who they are, right? Like it's difficult. And I feel like I've been able to meet people since I've came home because I've done a lot of great things since I've been home. And it simply has been um just my character, my character of, hey, nice to meet you. This is what I do. What do you do? Oh man. And to be able to just like uphold a conversation like has took me very long, right? Because I'm not an awkward person. Like I know how to socialize.
You mean it's taking you far?
It's
your
taking me far.
ability to just chop it up with people, anybody.
Yeah. So I mean, it took me far in prison. It took me it took me far. It took me far to be able to start getting into the politics and um to start just kind of growing and being accepted. And I early on at 19 years old, I got sent to Pelican Bay State Prison. So, you imagine.
So that was your sentence.
My sentence was to life in prison.
Your sentence was life in prison.
Life in prison.
With or without?
With.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You had a good lawyer.
Yeah. So it was sentenced to life in prison. And then just like sent off to prison, and to serve my term or whatever that meant.
When were you eligible for your first parole hearing?
2075. So I'm not even supposed to be here.
All right. So you get sentenced to life in prison. And your first parole hearing,
I came home.
But it wasn't supposed to be until 2075.
Yeah.
All right, so hang on. A whole lot happened between.
Of course.
So tell me what you decided to do while you were in prison that would lead for you to get out, when I'm guessing that there were a lot of different forces at play inside of prison that could have added more time to your sentence.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I first came into the system, like, yeah, I wilded out. It didn't have no purpose and no sense of direction. So like I did everything that a prisoner would do after serving life in prison, whether it's fighting and contributing more into the cause or contributing more into that criminal and gang lifestyle, right? Didn't really have no care in the world. Like, I'm doing this is me. I'm getting tattoos, like I'm earning my stripes, I'm politicking, I'm trying to move in the direction of just elevate, right? To receive like power and respect. I guess that's what most folks would want to obtain, right? When you're moving in that direction. Um, so it came a time and a point in my life that like I had this like epiphany. I had like yeah, I had an epiphany. I had something that I would call like a growth spurt, and it was more like it was difficult because I was so filled with anger, so filled with resentment of all of this that took place in my adolescence, my childhood, right? With family and friends and my sentence and sitting here in prison.
Were you blaming that stuff for why you were in prison in your mind? Some of it?
I believe that I did to some extent, but I feel also like I also knew taking the responsibility. Like,
That goes back to
yeah, like
right.
taking the responsibility of, you know what, like I did this shit. I have to deal with it, right? Um, Instead of sitting there like, oh, I'm a victim. Like, nah, man, I made a decision to join the gang. I made the decision to pull the trigger. I made the decision to do all these things. What was I expecting of what was gonna come out of this situation,
Right.
right? So, like, as I stood there and went through this time in Pelican Bay, like, there was a lot of things that were happening in my life at that moment that were kind of shaking me and to think different. And what I mean by that, it was like at the time we had lost my grandmother,
Mhm.
which was kind of like very important in our family. My grandfather and my grandmother were the center of what moved a lot of us, right? They were the foundation. So when we lost my grandmother, that hit me.
And you couldn't go to
And
the
you
funeral.
can't go to the funeral.
Right.
And then my grandfather uh died like a year or 2 years later, right? And then at that time I lost one of my other grandmothers, a lady that wrote me every month and sent me like fuck like 20 to 40 to $50 just so that I can go and buy some food or
Every month.
yeah. And this is a lady that I believe loved me. This is the mother of my father. So I believe also that she felt the disconnection and the absence of my father, and I feel like she tried to replace that.
Where did she live? I'm going somewhere with this. Where did she live?
Where does she lived?
Where did she live when she was sending you this money and
She
supporting
lived
you?
in California. I think at the time I'm not quite sure where she was. Or she was living in like in the Central Valley, more towards like Calipad and Calexico area.
So I asked the question because I hear you getting support
Yeah.
once you're in prison. Did anybody come to visit you in
Oh
prison?
yeah.
All right. So I find it almost tragic that it took something like that to happen to you
Yeah.
for people to figuratively come to your football game.
I mean,
You feel me?
yeah. I agree, and I see that. I've also been, and I don't hold it, but I also know that by my own wrongdoing, I was in prison, and I had to take responsibility of that and not use it against people when they didn't visit me. But it's hard not to accept that when people don't visit you or answer your calls in prison to say that it doesn't affect us,
Right.
right? Because we're going through difficult times while we're in there, regardless if we committed our crime or didn't. Um, but I remember that how I made peace with it was saying, you know what, like everybody has their own personal life and their own struggles that they're going through. I can't expect that everyone's gonna drop everything what they're doing to come to me and aid me, right? But also it allowed me to see while I was in prison, it was almost like if I was buried alive, and I was able to see who came to my own,
Mm.
tomb to be able to drop a flower, be able to drop a thought, you know. Um, you realize that sometimes, regardless if people have their own personal lives, how much a person thinks about you and how many people put it into action, right? So there was very few people that did put it into action. A few of my guy cousins, a few of my girl cousins, and my grandmother, my mom, my stepfather, my brothers, my sister, you know, and most importantly, like my wife, which was somebody that I met soon after I lost my grandfather.
So wait, so you meet your wife after you lost your grandfather, but you're in prison.
Yes.
How'd you meet your wife?
So I met my wife. It was simply through a Right a Prisoner website. It's like
Right, a prisoner website.
yeah,
Okay.
it's a so you have to sign up for it, of course. It's a pamphlet that they send you in prison, and you receive the pamphlet, and it gives you instructions on how to go about it, right? Whether it's writing a 250-word essay, uh, sending a picture, a drawing, or something that best describes you, right? And you pay the amount. I think at that time was like $40.
So, bro, you up there tendering.
Yeah. Through paper though, like this is like at its finest. Like we didn't press buttons and send likes. Like this was like i
Old
have
school,
i have
bro.
250 words to best describe myself.
That's hot.
That's fucking hot.
That is
So
hot.
best believe it. Like I'm putting some shit that
Long walks on the
yeah,
beach.
like
I love it.
I enjoy this and that.
Oh
Like
man.
so,
And no picture?
I put a picture,
Okay,
and at that
okay.
time, like I'm young, I'm handsome, like, and I'm all tatted up. Like these girls are attracted. They want a fucking bad boy, right? Like
Dude,
let's be real about this shit. Like
that's
they're looking in the wrong places
for Ernesto.
for fucking love, and like, and that's not to even like let's put it on the table. Like most of these women, not to say all, some are looking for love. Out here, you can find the same thing out here that you find in there, right?
Right.
And vice versa,
Right.
right? Like, if anything, I think that some men in there are a little bit more in tune with themselves because they don't have distractions, right? You don't have like the social media, you don't have everything else. So
Like you.
exactly,
Like you.
like me at that time, right?
Yes.
And I really wasn't really looking for a girlfriend. I was looking more for a friend, someone to pass time and write. By the grace of God, man, my wife entered my life. When she entered my life, I don't know how that saying goes, behind every good man or there's a strong woman, whatever. I felt like that fit me because I was at my infancy of change. I was at my infancy of losing important people in my life, right? And I knew things were gonna get worse.
Mm.
And I was either gonna just lash out and become even worse in what I was doing, or I was gonna get a hold of who I was and say, man, like I'm losing more than what I'm gaining. At that point, like I recognized that. And when she came into my life, like, she doesn't remember, but at least how I perceived how what she told me through a letter was, I told her like, would you ever want to be with someone like me? And what I got back was like, no, you don't have no life. Like all you talk about is your homies, all you talk about is life and this, and that. Of course, that was a full blown gang member, right? And that challenged me to say, you know what? I was like, I'm going to change my life, not for you, but for the next person, because I want to contribute into someone's life.
Mm.
Like I want to be that person that gives to someone rather than takes. And like,
Preach, bro.
like I started to get my shit together, right? I started to get my shit together. and I removed myself from that life, right? Like I found all the fucking balls and everything that I had to say, you know what? At this point, I'm no longer gonna hurt people. I'm no longer gonna become this person that I said that I was gonna become. Cause no one made this person. I made him myself. This was a mask that I had, right? Like people contribute into it, but I brought it to life. I was the dude that was holding the gun. I was the dude that had to grow those balls when the doors open and you fight people, right? I bit into the rhetoric and the beliefs, but I was behind the mask. So I have the ultimate decision to do whatever the fuck I want with my life, right? And that's exactly what I did. I took control. I said, you know what? I'm done.
How difficult was that to do in prison?
It was difficult. It's like trying to fucking stay cold when it's fucking hot as fuck.
But I'm saying you got people that you moving with in prison, and now
I
you're saying I don't want to do this anymore.
I had to remove myself, and I had to remove myself.
Did they make
And
it hard for you to do that?
They did, but I had to remove myself at all costs. And regardless of where you're at in prison, what yard or what facility, what prison, you're always gonna have men, right? And even correction officers that don't want to see you change, you know? But I look at it like this, and I could be wrong. I mean, there's a different platform for everybody, and some people want to be in that life still, right? They believe that to hold on to that because whether that's what they grew up into, like I get it, right? It's your identity, right? And we choose what we want our identity to be. For me, it was like I want to change and I want to make my own path. And if I was willing to die for all of this, why not die for myself?
Wow.
Right? Like, why not die? Like, I knew it wasn't gonna be easy because I had to restructure who I was in a place where most people have a fuck it mentality, right? So what did I do? I knew education was important, got my GED, started going to college. It allowed me to get transferred into a lower facility, right, with more programming, perhaps more like-minded individuals. Um, it wasn't easy. You know, I found my calling when 2016, 17, when I joined my first kid program. And I mentored over 100 kids in the Central Valley. Um,
That were in juvie?
no, that were either in placement homes that came through some type of program with juvenile or high schools, or churches or just all the way around. And I started to mentor kids and like I did a lot of public speaking. I did a lot of gang preventions, drug preventions, bullyings, closings, openings. I was the president of that program, right? I ended up becoming president and I ended up taking a major responsibility in creating a brotherhood and creating a program that I didn't create, but I was able to add my own taste of it. And that was by all means necessary, like preach um, the good word, like preach what we want to see in our society, um and also like walk, walk the way that you talk, you know
Preach.
so it's like for a while like we did that, and that allowed me to go into a lower facility and to be housed in a lower facility, which
So when you
gave
say lower, you mean
like by
less security?
less
Got
security.
you. Got you.
And that gives you more opportunities to do other jobs. So I did dog training, I did commercial roofing, drug and alcohol counseling. I was able to expand my mind, and grow in different areas to say, oh man, I have a trade now. Like I have a trade of being able to sit here and help somebody through their detox or their change process of addiction, right? And to obtain a sobriety. And I also know how to train dogs to be able to train a dog to become a service to someone with PTSD, like a
Oh, wow.
police officer,
Wow.
right? And then commercial roofing, which is something that it's it's an endless job, right? So being able to obtain all that and having the credentials and then going to board, going to board in the process, of course, with that woman that I said that's my wife, like we got married.
How soon after meeting her did you get married?
I met her 2013. We got married 2016.
So one of the questions I have for you is, you started to talk about, when you talked about meeting your wife online,
Yeah.
you said that, and then you started to talk about this transformation in you. Did the transformation begin in you before you met her, or once you started talking to her?
Once I started talking to her.
So this woman is a saint at the time.
Yeah.
Like she when you began speaking with her on a regular basis, did it start to bring you peace?
I feel that it did because I was able to um see a different perspective, right? She grew up different than I did. She has both parents, right? She's educated, comes from a good home, good family,
And yet she's on a prison website looking for.
looking for a motherfucker like me, right? And whether she says that she was or wasn't, the story behind it was that she was doing a project and her teacher told her to look for, front stories of someone in prison. So she wrote a man. Well, she wrote a man and a woman, and I was the only one that was able to respond. It being that I was that man that she wrote to.
Let me take you back to that prayer that you prayed when you were laying in your own blood,
Yeah,
when you prayed for peace. I'm not trying to get preachy or anything, but more often than not, God answers our prayers in the form of another person.
yeah.
And she was your person.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That prayer got answered that night when she found you online.
Yeah,
That's amazing to me.
yeah. I think that she's definitely been a big blessing in my life, more than what I can even like afford, right? And I feel that like because I've talked about my struggles still, and I think it gets to a point where like why I'm still at a point in my life where you still don't feel worthy, right? Like you still don't feel capable of. It's like, you know, so many things have gone wrong that it's kind of almost as if like you don't know how to value or cherish anything that's good, right? And like she brought a shift into my life that like I had to talk different, I had to walk different, I had to dress different. And then on top of that, like her family didn't even want her to marry someone like myself. So you imagine that, right? And then I remember I called my mom. I'm like, Mom, like this is the situation. She's like, if she was my daughter, I would have told her the same thing.
Right.
So it hurt even more, like because now this is the woman that to some extent has caused emotional damage. And then you have this woman, but my wife, I remember like she was I had proposed to her in 2015, and up to the day of the wedding, like she was unsure of what she wanted to do because of the pressure of her family. And I remember she told me like I choose love over family. And like for me that was deep because no one had ever chose me as the first option, so it definitely really like captivated me in the sense of like I need to strive harder. I need to be more. And like I had to change a lot of shit. Like I had become this cold person in prison, and I almost felt like in a form of an animal, like I had to aid and lick myself to become something different. And I've had to like fully ingrain myself in the self-help programs, right? And read books and like internalize everything that I was experiencing and create empathy, right? Create this awareness. And I was maturing like right in front of her eyes and right in front of my eyes. I was maturing.
You were maturing between the time you met and the time you proposed and she said yes.
Well, and even after.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. But I mean, I mean, logic would dictate that you would have needed to show her that you're not what her family was telling you
Yeah.
that you were before she decided to marry you. Ernesto, how many years were you incarcerated?
Total of 15.
So you were supposed to get life and have your first parole board hearing in 2075.
Yeah.
And you spent 15 years in prison, all in Pelican Bay?
No, I went from Pelican Bay to Corcoran State Prison, and then from there I went to Pleasant Valley State Prison.
She visited you?
She visited me once in Pelican Bay, numerous times at Corcoran, and then of course in Pleasant Valley, that's where was our. We've had multiple visits there, and that's where my son was conceived.
So tell our viewers, listen, bro, I've interviewed a number of people. I need you to explain to our viewers how you went from shooting at the police.
Yeah.
That's the biggest no-no in our criminal justice system, basically, is shooting at cops.
Yeah.
You go from shooting at cops to meeting your wife online while you're in prison. You go through this transformation as a result of meeting her, and now you have you have self inspiration. You're self motivated now. Like once you got like a little bit of momentum,
Yeah.
now you not only want to do this for her, you want to do this for you. Correct?
Yeah.
Outside of perhaps maybe child molesters in prison, how did you finesse your way to get conjugal visits in prison? Have conceived your child in prison when you weren't supposed to get out until 27? You weren't supposed to have a hearing until 2075.
Well, the thing is about prison, that prison has very changed a lot.
Prison has changed.
Prison has changed and it's changing. You have guys out here with capital murders and everything, right? Like most of my friends that I socialize with were all either incarcerated 15, 25, 30, 35 years, right? For capital, multiple murders, robberies, and whatnot, because the system is changing. The system is allowing men to redeem themselves by their own doing, right? They're allowing us to say, we're offering you programs, we're offering you rehabilitation. It's up to you to grab that and run with it.
Elections matter.
Elections matter, right? The whole Gascon thing, that affected us in a major way, in a positive way, right? Gavin Newsom, right? All of these governors that have, in a positive way, like all of that has helped the men come home, right? Like L Whoppers, life without the possibility of parole.
What do you say to the people that believe that you should have never gotten out?
I mean, I feel like everybody's gonna always have their own perspective, which at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter to me because I'm the one that has to wake up with my own wrongdoing and my good doings. Um, I'm a man of God. I believe in God, and I believe that specifically that everything that's written in the Bible is also a testament to who we are as human beings, and all the stories that have been said in that book is also um, of how it teaches us how to forgive, right? Like you talk about the 12 apostles, and not to get into this whole little thing.
No, you reading my mind.
You know, like not into these
Keep
12
going.
apostles, but all these motherfuckers were murderers and killers and prostitutes, right? Beheaders, all that shit. So I'm like, I'm not trying to take it out of context, but come on, you can't sit here and say, all of these walk with God.
God can and does use anybody and everybody.
Exactly. And I always say, you know what, man, don't judge, because you never know when you might find yourself in a similar situation, right? And like, people can judge me off the back. Oh man, your tattoos, you went to prison for this or whatever. But you don't know my upbringings. You don't know what I had to endure through my upbringings. You don't know my story. You don't know the emotional and mental roller coaster that I had to endure as a young child, right? Like I always tell people, people don't get up and just commit a murder. That doesn't happen. Like people grow up and are ingrained these things, right? Or they go through things in their lives that change their way of thinking, that influences the way they behave, right? And like being stuck in a cell, like I had an option to reprogram myself, right? When I started to have these growing spurts and when I started to have these people come into my life, like my wife and like mentors that I had in there, I had to sit there and say, well, what side do I want to be on? Do I want to be in the side? Because I know friends of mine that are still in prison to this day because they haven't figured it out, right? And then, like, there was like in these last few years, from like 2013 and on, like you started to have men that were formerly incarcerated come into the prisons and show you what success looks like.
And that used to not be possible,
Exactly. You
right?
have lifers coming into. I've gone into the prison I paroled numerous times, and all my old roommates and my old colleagues and prisoners, they see me and they're like, "What the fuck?" And I go in there with a suit, or I go in there representing the organization I work for, and they just look at me. Officers look at me like, man, like, but you know what? Like, I've been given a second opportunity, and I've done good with my second opportunity.
Talk to our viewers about your second opportunity and what you're doing right now.
So with my second opportunity, it being that I've been going on 2 years home, that I've been home, I work for a nonprofit organization called Healing Dialogue in Action. We do restorative justice, which simply, in the way that I can put it, is bringing together the victim, the offender, and the community and repairing the damage that has been caused. Giving the space to the victim so that know that they're heard, that they're valued, that what they feel is valid. Um, Also side by side with the community to repair the community, and in a very like powerful way, I guess I could say, is allowing the offender the space to amend what he has done and to also be heard, right? Because I go back to saying, like, no one wakes up and just does these things. So, I love the organization I work for. I've been wanting to work for them since I got out. I heard about them when I was inside a prison. I advocated for myself and I finally landed a job with them. I'm a reentry supervisor for them right now. I believe in their vision. I believe in trying to repair our communities, right? And I work with the SYTF, which are all the young adults coming out of Camp Kilpatrick and Sylmar. I help them integrate back into society. We have a squad that works inside a prison, which are called credible messengers, that are men with lived experience, um, that have also shared their story with them and help them understand how, you know, they need to make the next moves in their lives, right? And to be simply be there for them, right? Be there for them, help them through their journey, um, be that beacon of hope for these youth. Because a lot of us that went through the system, like we didn't have that. Like nowadays, and it's a big controversial thing, like these youth are committing a murder or a crime and they're being let out within 3 to 4 years. When in the old ages, when I grew up, you committed a murder or a crime and you got out 15, 20, 30 to 5 years later. So it's a big shift, and all eyes are on us right now on how can we make this possible, right? How do we use our lived experience? We don't have degrees, we don't have BAs and masters and doctrines, we don't have any of that. All we simply is have the heart and the spirit of wanting to repair our community, of having personal transformative relationships with people, right? Like what we do, a therapist can't do it, law enforcement can't do it. And the reason why I say that is because if they did, that they would have been solved the problems. And I'm not saying we're solving the problem, but we're definitely having a different approach. And I would like to quote one of my mentors that I had, which I still have. His name's Eugene Walker, and he said, "Those closest to the problem are the solution."
No doubt, no doubt. But you also have to keep in mind that law enforcement, their job is not to solve the problems that make people become criminals, right? Far too much is put on their plate as it is. I have to express my respect for you and all that you've decided to do to improve yourself. And I say that because it wasn't just the change in laws that enabled you to get out of prison at your first hearing. Tell me some of the feedback that you received going into that hearing about how people viewed you. Like, did you have confidence that you were going to get out based on what people were telling you you had done with your life that set you up for the possibility of getting out?
I did have the confidence. I'm not going to sit here and lie because I did the work. And then regardless, like when we talk about peace, like I knew, like I had some peace within me knowing that like prison was not a place I was going to stay.
Mm.
Like I didn't accept it. I accepted the programming and doing what I had to do to get on by, but I knew that wasn't my destination. My mind was already growing, and I had already expanded to say like this is not my environment.
This is not my final stop.
This is not my final stop. Like I don't thrive off the simple shit that prison's providing. Like for me, it's like I'm thinking, and I've never been educated on anything other than what the simple education we get, right? Or whether we're going to college and all that. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, man, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like I want to create my own business, right? Like I want to have my own home, something that I don't even think that my generation or my mom's generation has even had, right? To be able to put my son through college, to be able to give a life to my son and my wife that I didn't have. So like knowing that I was in prison and the odds were like very low that I was gonna come home on my first board hearing. Why? Because my crime consists of shooting at two police officers, right? So all of that, and then you have the negativity of men in there. Oh, you're not gonna go home. Homie just went aboard for this, and that. He
Right.
didn't go home, right? And then you have the other men in there that don't want to see you go home. So by all means necessary, they're gonna fabricate a lie, or they might do something or push your buttons to see if you still have that gangster in you, right?
Misery loves company.
Exactly. So it's like I went against all odds. And to top it off, I had a lawyer. The state appoints you a lawyer,
Right.
right? Man, that motherfucking lawyer only went to see me one time, and he had two times to see me before my board hearing. One time. So you could tell I was not his primary goal or his purpose. He was appointed by the state. He wasn't paid by me or my family, right? So it's like I had did all the work. I did everything you could think of. I ran groups, I facilitated, I build a new belief system where I interact with the officers. I help people regardless of your crime, right? Like I mentor people regardless of their crime. Like I knew I was already in a different stage of my right. Like, and when I went to board, like I felt confident. I mean, whether I got denied or not, I feel confident that this wasn't the last stop for me. I remember like my lawyer was like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I never, someone dropped the ball between my office and the prison." And I remember, it's crazy. Like I haven't shared this many times, but like I was like, "Oh, don't trip. I already have a lawyer." And at that time, like I had started to accept God in my life, right? I started to have like these crazy ass interactions with people, and almost like as if like God was coming to me in a sense of like, bro, like you need to come to this side, you know, like you need to come to this side because I'll give you eternal life. I'll give you and your wife and your son eternal life, but you need to bow down, right? Like, and not in those words, but in the sense of how he was coming to me and how I felt, because I didn't really have that peace even while I was in there. I just know that I needed to get to a certain destination, and that was freedom. So it's like, I told my lawyer, man, I hired a lawyer already. And he's like, oh, I didn't get no memo. And I'm just like, yeah, it's the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's what you said to him?
Yeah.
That's your lawyer?
Yeah, he looked at me like I was crazy.
Hey.
I was like, bro, just relax. Like, I got this. Just don't open your mouth, represent me in what you have to, and I got the rest. Because I've built that forethought, I know consequential thinking. Like, I have in place what I need to say, and not only what sounds good, but I've internalized this shit. Like I live by it, right? I have multiple chronos from officers and so on saying that I am a changed individual in this facility, right? So like without even said, like, man, we commend you for your change. At the time, the commissioner was Robert Barden, which is somebody that I had an interaction when I was in Pelican Bay, doing a hunger strike. So he was like, I've seen your growth, right? Like, and we're gonna grant you suitability. And they have 150 days to sign off on it. I got to like the 140 or something day, and the governor didn't sign off on my date. So regardless if they give you suitability, it still has to go to the governor's desk. And Gavin Newsom decided not to sign off on me because he felt that there were still contributing factors that I had in my present self that can potentially be a danger to society, low self-esteem, right? Like all these things, like I could potentially come out and do the same thing, you know.
Okay, so he doesn't sign off on
So he
you.
doesn't sign off, and they send it to it's called, I believe it's pronounced a in bank or in bank, and where they allow the public to decide. So the oppositions can call in, and also family and supporters can call in, and they make a decision based on that.
So the community
Which
overruled the governor.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I had a lot of supporters. I had a lot of strong supporters, family and friends. I had made a lot of close friends while I was in prison.
So the community vetoed the governor's decision, and that's how you got out.
Well, they present their case in front of 12 commissioners. So not just one now, but it's 12. So all 12 have to come into agreement that they're going to release you and sign off on you based on what they're hearing from the public.
Unanimous.
Unanimous.
It can't be a majority.
Opposition didn't call in.
So, but I'm saying it can't be majority. It has to be unanimous.
I think so.
Okay.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that, but I believe so.
But that's how juries work.
Yeah. So it was unanimous, and I was released.
So talk to me about, before the camera started rolling, you talked to me about some of the challenges.
Yeah.
Your goal was to be free. You're free now.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you? Because you told me, despite being free, there's some challenges in being free.
Yeah. Definitely relationships have been a challenge for me. Marriage. I came home married to my wife, and I'm still married. But we didn't last very long, right? Because
You've been out 2 years now.
I'm going on 2 years. October 26th of this year will be 2 years that I've been home. And we didn't last very long. And I want to be as mature as I can and also be accountable too. Like, I didn't make it easier for her. We live at a distance. She lives up north. I live down south, right?
Right now.
Right now,
Okay.
as we speak. Which as we speak, we're trying to, get a place of our own down here. Rent a house or an apartment or something. So soon after, like we split up, and
Soon after you got out,
soon after I got out, like at least 4 months, 4 or 5 months after I got out,
you split up.
we split up, and I allowed myself to fall into temptation, and like most of my family or whoever watches this, they're gonna be like, damn, like you're the typical fucking convict that gets out and just goes out and cheats or does this and that. But I started to feel the pressure all over again, and I started to fall into this thing again of, you know, there was a strain in our relationship, the way we communicated, the way we fought, and a lot of trauma you started coming back. And I made the conscious decision of saying, you know what, I don't want to be in this fucking relationship, right? Because what I thought was gonna be a reality ain't a reality, right? And not alone do we live at a distance, but I'm out here on my own. Of course, I have family, but I'm out here working 2 to 3 jobs, trying to establish myself in society. And I feel like her expectations were very high on me, just as much as everybody's expectations were high. And like through this process, I didn't feel understood or supportive. Not to say that they didn't, but how I moved forward. And it was difficult. I accept that it is difficult to be a man after serving so much time and to fit into this cookie cutter, pattern that someone has for you, right? Like people think like, man, he he did so much time, he got his life together, now he's back out here inside, he's a changed man. Like, no, man.
Yeah, but you know what though? Change doesn't mean perfect,
Exactly.
right? Because whether any of us have been in prison or not, none of us are perfect. And I find it refreshing for you to share with our viewers that when you get out,
Yeah.
there's a bar of expectation that is placed on you
Yeah.
that isn't realistic for anybody.
It's not. And we're trying to overcompensate, right? Whether people want to be honest about it, like, oh, I'm not trying to catch up with time. That's lost time. I'm trying to make new memories, right? Like, at the end of the day, you're a fucking 35 or 40 something or 50-year-old man coming back into society. You're definitely fucking outdated, right? Your patterns, your way of thinking, your like society is different from how it was
Right,
5 years ago.
right, right.
Like, so you imagine you're trying to, integrate back into society, and not only do you have the expectations that are like expected of everybody, work, right, pay your bills, um, and I think that and I know, of course, like with how society is built and the whole financial thing, like you're only working to survive,
Right.
right? Like you don't have no credit. I didn't have no credit. I didn't have no money saved up for years. I'm starting at square one. I'm starting at ground zero. And like I'm gonna be honest, like I like the idea of being married. I like the idea of having a wife. I like the idea of having a family and a home. Who doesn't? But do I have like this whole knowledge of it? Like, no, I'm trying to figure it out. And
But neither did she.
neither does she, right? And I guess that's why most men or women have ran away from a situation, because it's like, you know what? Like, I don't want to deal with this shit.
I just say that because nobody knows what it's like to be married until you get married.
Exactly. And it can be difficult, you know, and it takes two to mingle. It takes two people to make a relationship. And you know, like I've shied away from talking about it in through these platforms, like emotionally and mentally, like I wasn't fit to be in a relationship, right? Because I haven't even fucking like dealt with my trauma as a child. Like I haven't even dealt with being molested. So it's like you're in this relationship with a woman, right? And then all you think about is like, damn, like I'm not pure, right? Like I'm not able um to provide perhaps what this woman is. And perhaps you could provide it, but in your mind, you're held captive by this trauma, right? So anything you really do through these relationships, and best believe it, like once we split up, I entered multiple relationships. And then I started to see like all these character defects because I start taking these women apart, like through my own mind, right? And then I start seeing, I was like, it starts reminding me of how I grew up, right? And as you know, the person that victimized me, I start thinking about my father. I start thinking about how things were with me and my mother, right? And it's almost this sense of fear and losing control. Because you remember, like, as I said, when I was about 11, 12, 13 years old, and I said, I'm not going to be no one's victim.
Right.
So it's like allowing someone into your premises, allowing someone to enter that safe space, right? Like, I can't relinquish that power because what is love if love is being vulnerable, I guess?
Yeah, it is.
It's
And
being vulnerable and allowing the other person, it's like faith, right? Something you can't see, but you still believe in it. And that tends to be the compass in your life of how you move forward. And the same thing is with the relationship. You don't know if this person's going to be good for you 10 or 15, 20 years from now, but you let love be the compass that sails you through life, right? And that's been my biggest obstacle as I've come home. Like, this is a wonderful woman, has all the strong characteristics, right, of a strong, good woman, right? She's a wonderful mother. But it's like, you know, we all want something in life. But can we be very mature enough to accept that we need that at that moment, right? And I haven't been completely honest with myself and been completely honest with someone because I live a very simple life. I work, I come home, I go to sleep. The times that I was single, I go out, but there'll be times I go out and I go to a bar by myself, you know, casually, just sit down, enjoy a Moscow Mule and just relax. And
we need to do that today. We do.
like, you know, and that's the biggest thing I battle with now. Like, yeah, I feel like I'm successful and I'm striving, right? I have a wonderful job. I have wonderful bosses, a wonderful organization. But just like before, too, like, and I'll air this out, and then potentially my boss is gonna be like, "Man, are we gonna lose you?" Like, it's a choice of career paths because I've left prison, but I haven't left prison. Why? Because I'm still at ground level serving my community. So trauma resurfaces every single day, right? And I know that that tends to like hinder our relationship with me and my wife and my son because I'm always exposed to the people. I receive calls from prison, I answer them, right? I can be at the dinner table, I can be out with my wife and my son, I answer them. Now, since I work with youth, you call me, I answer the call. Like, a job comes up and I gotta go to prison. This weekend is my birthday. Monday's my birthday. And I've been so focused on trying to make myself available for this nonprofit that I've totally forgot about that it's my birthday. And this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, which my wife had plans for us, I would be going into a facility, a prison, to help men. So it's like I've totally been disconnected from that. Like from the reality of enjoying my family and enjoying my birthday as a free man because I'm so busy still trying to help and repair the damage that I've done.
Well, let me say this to you. I want to thank you for sharing your life experiences with me and our viewers. And I'll say this: I'm confident about where your life is headed because you have a conscience. Like most people do their best to avoid thinking about consequences or how this is going to affect X, Y, and Z. That's very strong inside of you. And then you talk about your faith, bro. I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Don't let the perfect ruin the good.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing. Keep thinking things out. I appreciate you, bro, and I want to do this again with you. And I wasn't lying. You said Moscow Mule. I do that from time to time. I do that specific drink from time to time. So
Yeah.
we're gonna have to have a Moscow Mule.
Yeah.
Ernesto, thank you.
I appreciate it, man. And thank you for allowing me to vent out. You know, I really appreciate what you do, allowing us to have this platform. And hopefully that the viewers can really just see it for what it is and not be so judgmental. You know, um, we're all humans, man, and we're all trying to make this work. And like,
Facts.
yeah.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you, brother.
All right,
Thank
bro.
you, man.
All right, bro.
Thank you.